participate in debates about when exactly the Roman Empire ended and the Byzantine Empire began? History Channel keeping you up at night learning about the different tactics used on the Gauls and the Vandals? Or maybe just love an undead faction? If so, then the Old Dominion might be for you. In this series, I will discuss the basics of different Conquest factions so you can decide if they're interesting enough to try them out. Let's dive into the lore. In Capitus, the seed of humanity, faith birthed a god, Haslia. This got started as a mote of primordial power, but over time and devotion, grew to become humanity's patron god. Over time, though, Haslia stopped being worshipped as its desire for power fractured itself and meant humanity no longer had all of its prayers answered. In time, enclaves of humans would strike down their own god, and wounded, he would make a deal with the horsemen of death. This deal saw the destruction of Capitus, the fleeing of several human factions like the city-states and 100 kingdoms, and the rise of the undead. Now, cult of the devoted and the reanimated, humanity's once throne of the world became cinders in the fires of devastation. The influence for this faction, by just the look of it, is ancient Rome or Byzantine time periods, depending on where you want to look at that exactly. I will be honest, when I looked at this faction, I didn't realize that they were undead at first. I just really liked them. So let's get into little basics of the army rules. For this, again, maybe you know the game, maybe you don't, so I try to talk a little bit of broad strokes for this. So first things first is most things in this army have the animate vessel special rule, which means you don't get to do the inspires in action. You could still be inspired, say, on a successful charges and all, but you don't get to do the inspire action. You get terrifying one, and you have no resolve stat. So the whole chunk of damage that you take in this game from rolling resolve and failing and all of that, you don't do that for all but 2 units in this army. The other thing Animate Vessel does is let you get dark power points when your stands die. They'll go into 1 or 2 pools, which we'll talk about in a moment. One of the rules that you have is Memories of Old. So this starts as an in combat or out of combat, effectively action, but you can use an action on this and it gives that animate vessel unit some sort of bonus. Every unit has their own, but they might be things like more shots or more cleave or better defense. There's ways, though, to be able to get those as draw events or maybe even draw events and actions, which all comes from the dark power pools, which we'll get into now. So again, as those stands die, then you can put tokens down. You have the dark power pool, which helps pretty much the army, and you have the Fallen Pantheon, which only helps the Fallen Divinity if that happens to be what you're running. The Fallen Pantheon one essentially is the divinity gets better. There's more to it, but that's simple enough for the moment. For the other one, the Dark Power Pool, hey, you start at Tier 1, you can do Memories of action. Tier 2, hey, it's a draw event. Tier 3, draw event and action. And hey, you're just always inspired. And with certain characters, you can go to Tier 4, which means when your opponent fails resolves on 6s, they'll take extra damage if they're engaged with you. So your army gets stronger as you go along. Effectively, it takes about 9 tokens to get to Tier 2, then you got to get to 18 to get to Tier 3, and if you can go to 23 plus and are allowed to get to Tier 4, you can go there as well. So as you lose stands, you actually gain something. And then there's a Fallen Pantheon, but that's a whole separate thing. I've done videos on her if you want to take a look at that. So let's discuss a little bit about playstyle. So in general, you're looking at pretty good units, I think pretty solid units that only get better later in the game. Normally what happens for most people is later in the game, as they're losing units, as things are dying, as you're running out of stuff, you are much less effective. That's not true for these guys. You actually become more effective essentially later on. So losing those stands will make you stronger. However, it's a balancing act because if you lose too many, even though the ones I have might be good, I just might not have enough left. So you still have to be very careful about all of that. Generally a slower army, move 5 in a lot of spots. Your brutes are a bit faster, but your general infantry about 5. So a more slow and plodding army, I would say. You have multiple cleave through units for really good armor penetration. So cleave in at least a few of the spots is quite good to get, and they are good units. You could always go for the Fallen Divinity route for a very completely different feel. So this army, yes, you could kind of branch in different ways, but going with Fallen Divinity is essentially its whole different brand new army. You are building differently, you are aiming differently, all of that. So you really have 2 very, very different factions in this one. When we talk about strengths, lack of resolve and being a hard-hitting faction. So you can stand up to damage better than other people because you lose the whole second half of damage that people do that resolve, other than, like I said, on 2 units. And if those units are getting combat, it didn't matter anyway. It's not like their saves were going to, even if they didn't have it, they weren't going to stick around. And you tend to be pretty hard hitting. Like I said, you got a good amount of cleave in some spots. You have decent armor. You have some really good horses. Actually, arguably outside of 100 Kingdoms, probably some of the best horses that exist out there. At least in the one unit, the Cataphracti, but some of the other ones that draw me are actually quite good as well. And you can be very, very hard to shift, because without that resolve means when someone smacks into you, if they can't take you out honestly, then you're just there. And what's nice is the popular options have good cleave, attacks, and wounds. The units that you like the look of and want, they're actually going to do well. For weaknesses is one, that speed. You are slow or slower in general. So if you're outscored early, it could be hard to catch up. I've played games where, yeah, I'm stronger near the end, but if they scored too much, maybe I can't make up those points. And not being able to use that Inspire in general on a good amount of your units, not all of them, but a good amount of them, they hit a little bit worse than others. Their clash characters is closer to like a 2. So on certain ones you see a 3, but more often a 2, which means early rounds when you don't have to that tier 3, when you're always inspired, you didn't charge, you might not really be getting much done. It's really 2 different armies as well to consider. For complexity, I'd put them at a 1 out of 5. If you're not going Fallen Divinity, because that's its own thing, that can be much more complex. But if you're just going in general, they're very forgiving, because when you make mistakes, 1, it's harder for your opponent to kill you, and 2, as they do, your units that are left are going to get better. So you do need some amount of death in your army to get what you want. Like I said, you get to skip a whole part of the sequence, and you're not punished by those mistakes. You get better later when other people are weaker. And like I said, your mediums and heavies pack a good punch. So taking those sort of options, you're really going to like what you got. Okay, so let's talk about building this army out then. All right, so obviously we're looking at 1-player starter. I mean, you could go for the full 2K army that they purchased, but let's talk about just the starter. It's about 720 points is listed. However, I know from experience building this one, the way they would put it, those Legionnaires, they really should be able to be Praetorian Guard as well. I don't think they could separate them. Don't quote me on this. If not, your next purchase is a box of Legionnaires, which could be Praetorian Guard. But effectively, you should easily be able to get closer to 800 points by making some Praetorian Guard. You could also do more Varangian Guard instead of Anatheti if you want. So you have some options there. But with the Ziliarch as the Warlord, this is actually a really good warband, because his ability, hey, once per game, everyone in his warband gets to swing twice. So it's just effective right out of the box, actually. After that, now, not looking at the Fallen Divinity side, we'll talk about that for a moment if you really want. But outside of that, what I would say for paths of where to go from here, what merely makes this army sing is being able to get to your high level, say tier 3, be inspired all the time, be able to use your memories of old. My apologies. So for that, it's Hierodeacon and the Archimandrite. So I'd either go Archimandrite with maybe some more Legionnaires, so you could build Praetorian and put that into his unit, and probably Bone Golems, because that's something they could take. If you're going Hierodeacon with Cultist is honestly one of the things I do. Gets it out early, can get extra power tokens down. And then your Brute of choice. They have several options. Bucephaly are a personal favorite of mine, but obviously you can sprinkle what you want. So I would go with one or the other, or in time. Honestly, you're probably going to go towards both. The other thing I would probably do then is look at the, say, or other option I should say, is Big Model. You could go Theocrator with unit of Legionnaires, because it does have to take something. And again, that Legionnaires could become Praetorians, which go into the other unit. Or you can go Fallen Divinity. If you're doing that, though, then you're going to want some statues, the Canophores and Carotids that we have listed here. That would be what you want then. So, overall, that's what I would say. It gets you a good little bit of getting into this. All right, so if you like the undead or just things that look Roman, then maybe Old Dominion are for you.